Hi, how are you? Hope you're well. Today we are doing my November wrap up, which this month has been kind of iffy overall because I've had quite a few bad reads, but then I also found my new favorite series ever in life. So, yeah, I think purely because of this series, I am going to say that this was a great month. However, I did have quite a few bad reads. The first book that I finished in November, I finished on the 2nd of November and I gave it 2 stars. And that book would be Lizzie Blake's Best Mistake by Mazey Eddings. So I did actually read this book along with few others as a little reading vlog challenge. So I'm not going to go into my review about it, but basically this book is about a girl named Lizzie and she ends up getting pregnant from like a little 1-week fling that she had with this Australian dude. Basically, she's a baker and she has ADHD, so she kept losing jobs, but she finally found a job that kind of fits her, and the owner is very sweet, and then the Australian dude ends up moving to wherever she lives, I don't remember, so that they can move in together and raise the baby together. He wants to be an active father figure. And the book takes place over her pregnancy, and it's showing the progression of their relationship from platonic co-parents to an actual relationship. Overall, this book wasn't for me because I just don't like the pregnancy trope, but I wanted to give it a shot. And I would recommend this book if pregnancy tropes is your thing and it sounds interesting, but overall, despite the trope, just not the best book in my personal opinion. So 2 stars, did not really like it that much. The next book that I read was actually a reread, and I finished that on the 3rd of November, and that book is You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogle, and I gave it 5 stars. So this book for me just is a favorite. It's a very fun, silly book. It's definitely one of those books that you can't really take seriously, but I just really enjoy it and the characters and everything about it. And then basically what it's about is it's about this couple who is engaged, and they kind of end up on a unspoken game of who can be the worst to pull out of the engagement first. And it's basically a kind of lovers to enemies to lovers second chance romance where during this game of trying to be like bad to each other, they end up like remembering all the reasons they fell in love and like fully being themselves. And again, you kind of have to suspend belief just a little bit for this book, but overall it's very fun and it's a fantastic winter read. I don't know where it takes place, but it's throughout October to January or December in a very, very cold northern state. So in general, just a very fun book and a very sweet romance, and Nicholas, the guy, he's a wonderful character. I love him a lot. So next I read a series. I finished A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lynn on the 6th of November, and then I finished its sequel, A Venom So Dark and Sweet, on the 10th of November. Both books I ended up giving a 3 stars. I was actually very excited to read this. I'd been wanting to read it all year, so I was a little disappointed by it. Basically, what it's about is her sister is dying and her mother had already died, so she enters this competition in her sister's place to be, I forget what it's called, but essentially their magic system is with tea, and like how you steep the tea and what ingredients you use makes different potions, and she's entering the competition to be like the Empress's steeper, and so that she can find a cure for her sister so that her sister doesn't die. And then it kind of evolves into this whole political agenda war thing, and yeah, so it was very interesting. This was my first ever Asian inspired fantasy. I believe it is based on Chinese folklore, but I could be wrong. And in general, it was a fun read. I really did enjoy the folklore of probably China. Again, I don't remember exactly which country, but I'm fairly certain it's China, so don't quote me on that, but But yeah, it was interesting. Like I said, I never read one before, so that was really fun and exciting. And in general, it was a good story. I just got really, really bored, especially in book 2. And in general, I wasn't hoping for a cozy fantasy, but I really didn't feel like reading a highly political war-based fantasy, which is kind of what it turned into. So it was a miss for me, but it is a really, really good book. It is well written, and maybe I just read it at the wrong time, who knows? But in general, it's a good book. I definitely would recommend it to anyone. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping to. Next, I finished, also on the 6th of November, a book that I originally DNF'd, which is very exciting. I did only end up giving it 2.75 stars, which is disappointing, but that book is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. So this is obviously the sequel to The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and I posted a reading vlog for this duology sometime earlier this year. I'm really happy that I picked it up again and finished it, and I didn't reread the entire book. I just started a chapter before I DNF'd it, so I read the last chapter that I read and then continued. I did kind of forget what happened a little bit, but it didn't affect the story too much because most of what I forgot was just character conflict, which I found really boring anyway. I'm not going to talk too much about what it's about because if you haven't read The Serpent and the Wings of Night, I don't want to spoil what happens there because obviously it's a continuation. But the main issue with this book and why I didn't like it that much is I very much fell out of love with the characters. I really enjoyed book 1. It was really fun. But then the first half of book 2 was just character conflict based on how book 1 ended, which is reasonable, but it was very boring and I stopped enjoying it, and by the time I picked it up again, I just really didn't care for the characters anymore. I also felt that book 2 massively dragged on compared to book 1, and the plot line just wasn't as interesting for me. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series because if you don't know, the Crowns of Nyaxia series is a 6-book series, and so far only the first 2 books are out, but it is 3 duets. So the first duet is completed, and then book 4 and 5 are going to be the next duet, and then book 5 and 6, 3 and 4 are going to be the next duet, and then 5 and 6 are going to be the next duet. So I haven't decided if I want to continue this series yet or not. I haven't decided if I like Carissa Broadbent's writing yet or not, because again, book 1, great. Book 2, really didn't love it. I think I might try and read her Daughter of No Worlds trilogy before the next book comes out, or not before the next book comes out, but before I decide to see if her writing style is for me, because I really don't want to read more of a 6-book series to not like it. Overall though, she's a very popular author and her writing is good. So again, this is another one where it's like I would recommend it, but it just, I don't think, at least book 2 wasn't for me. Again, I really loved book 1. I believe I gave that one 4+ stars. So there is that. The other thing about this series is it's about vampires, and don't get me wrong, I loved vampires. As I've said many times on this channel, during my Wattpad phase, I almost exclusively consumed werewolf and vampire content. But in terms of werewolves, I just can't do it. It's too cringy to me. It's just not something I can read about anymore, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with reading about werewolves. For me, I can't do it anymore. It just reminds me of all the silly little Wattpad books and fan fictions that I read. And let me tell you, I've read a plethora. I would literally just type in vampire and werewolf and go page per page and read every single book that's completed. So I have read a lot of great ones. I've read a lot of bad ones. So, and the thing with vampires is it didn't used to be this way. It's kind of gotten worse as I've gotten older, but like I'm very squeamish with the whole blood thing because every time they talk about sucking blood out of their victims, I think about getting your blood pulled for a doctor's appointment, and every time I have to do that, which is usually at least once a year, I fully pass out every single time without fail. I hate it. It makes me feel icky, like it grosses me. Ugh, just even talking about it right now, like my hands are going numb because it grosses me out so much. So every time I read about vampires now, I think of that, and then it just, it doesn't work with me, so that's the other reason why this is iffy, because every time they talk about blood, I'm like, oh. So yeah. The next book that I finished on the 9th of November, and I gave it 4 stars, and that was obviously Chicken Mate by Hazelwood. You already know my review because I posted a reading vlog for it like 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to go too in depth about that. Basically what this is about is this girl who's kind of a chess prodigy, but she hates chess, goes back into the world of chess and becomes a kind of professional chess player, and then it's a rivals to lovers story about her and the #1 chess player in the world. And then it does have a lot of like family drama and like growing pains and things like that. It's a very good book. It's well written. It's not just a romance story. And before reading this, I thought chess was the dullest thing in the world, and even I read the chess parts and I was mostly fine. I still found them a little boring, but that's again because I have a personal bias towards chess, so yeah. But it was an interesting book. If you don't know anything about chess, or you're like me and you think it's just really boring, you can still read this. Like, this is a very inclusive book in that sense, so it's nothing to worry about. Would recommend it. It's Hazelwood's first YA, which is really nice because there's not that much smut, so there's like some closed door things. It's not completely spice free, but you know, it's like if a 15-16-year-old read this, I don't think it would be out of pocket or inappropriate in any kind of way. Next, we read the series that changed my life for the better. The series that I have not stopped thinking about. The series that I will never forget. And the series that I will be rereading very soon in the future. And that would be the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy. So, I read Once Upon a Broken Heart. I gave it 5 stars and I finished it on the 14th of November. The Ballad of Never After, I finished on the 20th of November and I also gave that 5 stars. And then A Curse for True Love, I finished on the 22nd of November and I gave that 4.5 stars. And if you don't know what the series is about, it's basically about Evangeline making a deal with the Prince of Hearts to stop her lover's wedding to her stepsister, and in this deal she promises the Prince of Hearts 3 kisses to anyone he picks, and the story kind of divulges from there. I'm not gonna say more. I went into this completely blind. I am an avid believer in this series. You should go in completely blind. Don't know anything that happens. Trust me. It is so magical and wonderful and amazing, and it truly feels like you're in some like Disney princess movie. A lot of people say kind of like the Alice in Wonderland world, which I completely agree with. It's not based off of Alice in Wonderland as far as I know, like at all, but it has that same magic of like little baby dragons everywhere that are like the size of squirrels, and they roast marshmallows and then you can buy them and eat them, and it's so magical and wonderful. Evangeline, the main character, I love her with my heart. She's a hopeless romantic and she just keeps making bad decisions because of her hopeless romantic heart, and then she has to like deal with the consequences, and that's a really large part of this story. And I personally really love that because at the end of the day she is 16-17 and she makes 16-17-year-old choices, which when reading this I'm like, that was a bad choice, but I would have done the exact same thing. And I also just love that she is a hopeless romantic. Like, I really love that her dream is to just find her person and live happily ever after, because I don't know, I grew up where like I was like, oh, like love is stupid and being in love is stupid and I would never want to be in a relationship, and I was very much like this little like gremlin. And now that I'm older, I've done like a complete 180, and I think that mindset is really silly because I don't know, love is great, relationships are great, and reading about them is fun, and I just really enjoyed having a main character that was just like this hopeless romantic that just wanted love so badly, and like she wasn't shamed for it at all or anything. So I really loved it. The Prince of Hearts, also wonderful. Love his personality. He's so funny and witty and snarky and sarcastic and the perfect villain, and I would 10 out of 10 recommend the series. I have nothing but good things to say. Next, I finished A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. I finished it on the 20th of November and I gave it 3 stars. This was a fine read. It's the little novella between the original ACOTAR trilogy and then Silver Flames, and it's about their winter solstice, which is their version of Christmas, I believe. And it's kind of just a less than 300 page book about fluff of the characters with some mild setup for Silver Flames. It's a fun little read. I don't think it's a necessary read to go into Silver Flames, but obviously it's better if you do read it. In general, I enjoyed it. I'm happy I read it, and it was just a fun, quick little, well, I didn't read it, I listened to it, but it was just fun, especially for this time of year. It was just nice. So I'm happy that I saved it. And that was also a reread, by the way. I originally DNF'd it because when I read it, I wanted to finish the series and I didn't feel like reading 300 pages of fluff. So next I finished Heartless by Marissa Meyer, and I finished that on the 28th of November, and I gave it 3 stars. This book is a Alice in Wonderland retelling, and it is the villain origin story of the Queen of Hearts. So it takes place before Alice in Wonderland. I knew what happens at the end of this book before reading it, so my emotional reactions weren't as severe as some others might have been, but regardless, it was a read. I really can't say my thoughts without spoiling it, but if you've read it, let me just say, the ending was an ending, and I felt things. I felt a lot of things at the end of it. And if you haven't read this book, would I recommend this? I would, but I wouldn't read this book if you're going through a difficult time in your life at all. Don't read this when you're in a dark place. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna go further, but just be emotionally prepared. And then the final book that I read in November is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I actually finished this on the 28th of November as well, and I gave this 3.75 stars. So I wasn't ready to leave the Once Upon a Broken Heart world, so I picked up Caraval. And I definitely had a lot less interest reading Caraval than I did the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. However, it was fun. I did enjoy it. I'm happy that I'm reading the series. I'm currently reading book 2, which that's the series right there. I made a reading vlog for Once Upon a Broken Heart, which will be posted within the next few months, and then I'm also making one for this one, so I'm not going to go too in depth on my opinions on the books. However, what this is about is basically 2 sisters, Scarlett and Donatella, go to Caraval, which is this magical game that's a week long, and at the end of it you win a wish, and they do it to try and escape their terrible father. And then obviously in Caraval events unfold and things happen, and it turns into a trilogy. I'm not going to say much more than that because, again, lots of people love going into things blind. I am reading Caraval after Once Upon a Broken Heart, and if you don't know, the events that happen in Caraval connect to Once Upon a Broken Heart. So if you read Once Upon a Broken Heart first, there are some things that are spoiled for the Caraval trilogy, which for me, I don't mind. To me, it's like reading a prequel, so I kind of find it fun knowing what happened and figuring out how it happened. But if you care about that, definitely read Caraval first. If you don't care about that, you can definitely read Once Upon a Broken Heart first and then Caraval, but just know that the events are connected, and if you read Once Upon a Broken Hearts first, some of the mysteries in these books you might know the answers to. So this month, in terms of DNFs, I didn't think I had any, but I just checked. I DNF'd 4 books this month, which is crazy. So the first book that I DNF'd on the 9th of November, and that is A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmer. This is A Curse So Dark and Lonely's sequel. I stopped reading this series because in general, I just didn't enjoy it that much. I didn't really care about the plot progression, and then also new characters were introduced and I kind of hated them. I stopped fairly quickly. I stopped at 9%, which some people might say is too quick, but listen, I will DNF a book 10 pages into it if I can tell it's not for me. So the second book that I DNF'd on the 13th of November, and that book is getting its own entire reading vlog, so I'm not going to say what book it is because I'm not going to spoil that reading vlog for you. The third book that I DNF'd on the 27th of November, and that is The Honeymoon Crashers. It is a brief little novella sequel to The Unhoneymooners, and I believe it's only available as an audiobook. It's basically about her sister, the main character in book 1's sister, planning the main character's wedding in Hawaii, and then there's a little romance for the sister. I stopped at about 34%, and the reason I stopped is because I didn't like the sister nearly as much as I like the original main character, and I also got the ick because the love interest described the main character as having a tight little body, and that is like so, ugh. No, I hate that description. I think it's truly disgusting. Those words should never be ushered about a woman ever. So I DNF'd it. Just didn't like it, quite frankly. In the fourth book I DNF'd on the 29th of November, and I'll also not be sharing that book because that is also in a reading vlog, and I don't want to spoil it, and that reading vlog is coming out in December. So yeah, but that one I DNF'd because also just again, didn't really like the characters, didn't really like the story that much, and that was it. So that was my month in a nutshell. Did you read any of the same books that I read this month? And if so, what were your opinions on them? Please let me know. If you like me or my videos, I would really appreciate a like, comment, and subscribe if you feel like it. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye.